Hello everyone, and welcome to the Fictional Vortex. So we are back with an interesting movie on what if Naruto had the divine authority of the Sun God and could erase all curses. Naruto x Emilia x Rem. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. Chapter 1. The sun rises on a foreign sky. Silence was the first heresy. Before it, there had been a sound. A single, unified, cataclysmic scream that was the death rattle of a billion souls, the groan of a dying planet, and the final mournful sigh of a fading sun. He had been at the epicenter of that sound, a conductor to an orchestra of absolute annihilation. The sound had unmade him, tearing him atom from atom, reducing him to memory and will. Then, the silence, a profound, endless, and merciful void. The heresy began not with a sound, but with light. Over the lip of a colossal waterfall, where a perpetual rainbow was crucified on a mist of its own making, a single photon wavered. It ceased its mindless journey and held its position, a pinprick of impossible stillness. Another joined it, then 1,000, a million. An avalanche of light, a river of luminescence, began to flow against the current of the cascading water, converging on that single point of stillness. The light did not flash or burn, it wove. Threads of pure, golden radiance, like the output of a divine loom, began to intertwine. They spun themselves into the ghost of a circulatory system, a shimmering network of nascent veins and arteries. Starlight, ancient and silver, poured into the weave, solidifying into the pale, intricate lattice of a skeleton. The raw, brutal energy of a star's core was tamed, cooled, and compressed, forming the dense, powerful musculature around the glowing bones. The light bent, folding reality around its purpose, pulling motes of carbon from the air, hydrogen from the water, and nitrogen from the soil, stitching them into the spiraling chains of life. Skin formed last, a seamless expanse of pale bronze kissed by the sun of a world that no longer existed. It spread over the impossible anatomy, encapsulating the celestial engine within. Finally, a cascade of gold, brighter than the light that had birthed it, erupted from the scalp, forming a mane of sun-bleached hair. A final breath of celestial energy was drawn in, and two eyes snapped open. They were not the color of the sky. They were the color of the void the sky attempted to conceal, a blue so deep it was a memory of space itself. Naruto stood naked, water and light cascading from his newly formed shoulders. The roar of the great waterfall was the first true sound he had heard in an eternity, and it was a welcome assault. He raised a hand, examining the perfect, unscarred flesh. He could feel it, the thrumming, resonant hum of the divine authority that had remade him, the final gift of a dying god. It was a sun, caged within his chest, its corona a filigree of golden energy that branched through his soul. On his sternum, visible only to senses that could perceive such things, was a single, tear-shaped sigil of captive light, the mark of Amaterasu. The will that had saved him. He was alive. The thought was not triumphant. It was heavy. It was a burden. He was the sole inheritor of a graveyard, a king sitting on a throne of dust. The silence of his dead world was a phantom limb, an ache that he knew would never fade. He closed his eyes, not to remember, but to perceive. His senses, reborn and magnified by his authority, reached out. He felt the lifeblood of this new world, a current of energy that flowed through the earth and air. It was different from the chakra of his homeland. It was more chaotic, more primal. Odd, a part of his remade consciousness supplied ambient mana. He could feel it being drawn into the flora, giving the moss on the rocks a vibrant, almost sentient green. He could feel it in the strange, six-legged deer that watched him from the treeline before bolting. But alongside the vibrant flow of odd, he sensed something else. A stain, a dissonance in the world's song. It was a subtle, creeping shadow clinging to the edges of existence, a lingering trace of a power that was the antithesis of his own. A power of envy, of endings, of possessive, all-consuming shadow. It was ancient and deeply embedded. A poison in the planet's very soul. He had been born of the sun, and this world, he realized, was sick with a creeping twilight. His gaze fell upon his nakedness. It was an inconvenience. He focused his will, drawing on the core of power within him. He did not weave signs or speak incantations. He simply requested. He reached out and touched the fundamental connection between energy and matter. The secret song that his authority knew by heart. Light obeyed. Ambient photons condensed, their wavelengths shortening until they solidified. The dark, rich soil at his feet offered up its carbon. The air gave its fibers. They wove themselves together at his command, forming a simple, durable black tunic, comfortable trousers, and sturdy, soft-soled boots that molded perfectly to his feet. It was a quiet, practical miracle, performed with no more effort than breathing. Clothed, he turned his back on the waterfall, the monument to his rebirth, and began to walk. He did not know where he was going, but he could feel the direction. He could sense the great congregation of life, the distant thrum of thousands of souls clustered together. A city, a place to begin. The forest was alien and beautiful. Trees with spiraling, iridescent bark towered over him, their leaves the color of jewels. He saw creatures that defied the logic of his old world, birds with twin tails, rodents with chitinous plates on their backs. He was an intruder here, a ghost walking in a foreign land, yet nothing felt threatening. It was as if the very wildlife could sense the life-giving aura that emanated from him and knew he was not a predator. He walked in a bubble of serene acceptance. His mind, a vessel for an intelligence far older than his years, processed everything with startling clarity. He analyzed the ecosystem, the flow of mana, the subtle gradations in the ever-present shadow of the witch's curse. He was a scholar studying a text he had never seen before, yet whose language he innately understood. The weight of his loss was a constant pressure, but it did not break him. It had forged him. The frivolous, loud boy he had once been was a faint echo, a star whose light had taken 20 years to reach him and had now faded. In his place was a man who had watched a universe die and had been tasked with carrying its last light. After several hours of walking, the trees began to thin. The sounds of nature were slowly replaced by the distant sounds of civilization. The clang of a hammer, the rumble of wagon wheels, the faint murmur of 1,000 voices. He emerged owned the tree line onto a crest overlooking a massive city. It was a breathtaking sight, a sprawling metropolis of white stone and red-tiled roofs, nestled in a valley and bisected by a great canal. A colossal castle, all elegant spires and towering walls, dominated the skyline. The sheer scale of it, the vibrancy, the unassailable proof of life continuing, sent a pang through his chest so sharp it almost buckled his knees. He had forgotten what a living city looked like. He descended the hill and joined the flow of traffic on a wide, stone-paved road. Farmers drove wagons laden with produce, merchants chattered on horseback, and travelers walked with purpose. They paid him little mind, another solitary figure on a busy road. He walked among them, an invisible king, his regal bearing hidden beneath an unassuming calm. The moment he passed through the city's main gate, his senses were assaulted. The sheer density of life was overwhelming. The air was thick with the smells of baking bread, roasting meat, cut flowers, and unwashed bodies. The sound was a cacophony of vendors hawking wares, children laughing, guards barking orders, and the constant, rolling thunder of conversation. But it was what he saw with his true sight that arrested him. Every soul was a unique light, some bright and steady, others flickering with anxiety or dim with despair. And clinging to so many of them were the shadows. He saw the shadow of greed on a merchant short-changing a customer, the shadow of envy on a woman staring at another's jewelry, the shadow of fear on a man clutching a near-empty coin purse. These were minor, personal curses, the everyday darkness humans inflicted upon themselves. But the larger, ambient stain of the witch's power was here, too, feeding on these little shadows, making them deeper and harder to erase. This city, for all its beauty and life, was a garden for despair. He moved through the crowd with an unnatural grace, his path weaving through the densest throngs without a single bump or jostle. He was an observer, cataloging, learning. He saw the social strata in the cut of their clothes, the fear in their eyes when they looked at the city guard, the casual cruelty, and the unexpected kindness. It was in a bustling market square, vibrant with colorful stalls, that two lights, distinct from all the others, drew his attention. The first was a beacon of immense, yet naive, purity. A young woman with silver hair that seemed to shame the very sunlight. She was dressed in fine white and purple robes, and her face, a portrait of aristocratic beauty, was marred by a frantic worry. She was searching for something, her amethyst eyes scanning the crowd with growing panic. He noted her inherent kindness as she paused to help a crying child find his mother, an AC. tea that earned her glares and muttered curses from the surrounding people. They stared at her silver hair and half-elven features with a mixture of fear and revulsion. He saw the shadow of a great, historical prejudice settle upon her. A curse she had not earned but was forced to bear. It was a heavy burden, and it made her light flicker with sorrow. The second light was a stark contrast. It was a small, ferocious, and chaotic spark, zipping through the crowd with the speed and unpredictability of a hummingbird. A young girl, no older than 15, with a shock of blonde hair and eyes that burned with defiant fire. She was a creature of the streets, her movements economical and her gaze sharp, missing nothing. And as she darted past the silver-haired half-elf, Naruto saw it. A flash of movement, too quick for a normal eye. The girl's hand had snatched an object from the half-elf's robes. He saw the object in her grasp for a fleeting moment, an insignia, glowing with a faint magical light. But clinging to the insignia, visible only to him, was a dark, grasping thing. A deliberate curse. It was a shadow with purpose, shaped like a grasping hand, designed to act as a beacon, to lead its owner into a trap. The silver-haired woman cried out in dismay, finally noticing her loss. The small blonde thief was already gone, disappearing into the labyrinthine alleys of the city's lower districts. Naruto stood still for a moment, the market's chaos fading into a dull roar. He could walk away. It was not his concern. He had no stake in this world, in its politics or its petty crimes. His purpose was undefined, his future a blank page. He could simply observe, learn, and survive. But the sight of the curse, that deliberate, malicious shadow crafted to cause harm, stirred something within him. It was a dissonance he could not ignore. It was a weed in a garden he had just discovered, and his very nature, the essence of the sun that lived in his soul, rebelled against its existence. The shadows were his enemy. To see one and do nothing was a betrayal of the light he carried, a betrayal of the billion souls who had died to give him this second chance. With a decision made, he turned away from the distressed noblewoman. His purpose, for now, had a name. It was the name of a curse, and his job was to erase it. He melted into the mouth of a nearby alley, his movements silent and swift. His senses locked onto the fading spark of the young thief and the dark, hungry shadow she carried with her. The hunt had begun. Next, show thinking. The alleyways were a different world. The chi-rful din of the market was choked off by the high stone walls, replaced by the drip of stagnant water and the distant, mournful cry of some unknown animal. The air, once filled with the scent of food and commerce, grew heavy with the smells of damp brick, rot, and a pervasive, low-level despair that seemed to seep from the very stones. The shadows here were not just an absence of light, they were a presence, thick and cloying. Naruto moved through them not like a pursuer, but like a river flowing through a canyon. His pace was unhurried, yet he covered ground with an impossible efficiency. He didn't need to see the blonde thief. He was following the black, grasping stain of the curse she carried, a beacon of malevolence in his unique spectrum of sight. It pulsed with a faint, greedy rhythm, a hook waiting for its fish. The girl was fast, her path a complex web of shortcuts and hidden passages, but she was still tethered to the curse. For Naruto, it was like following a lantern in the dark. He saw the dregs of the city here. Men and women with eyes as empty as their pockets, children whose gazes were far too old for their faces. The minor shadows of desperation and hopelessness clung to them like grave shrouds. And the ambient taint of the witch's authority felt stronger, feeding on the fertile ground of their misery. He felt a familiar ache in the center of his being, the echo of a promise made to a dying world, that he would be a protector. That he would not stand by and allow the shadows to feast. The trail led him to a dilapidated part of the slums, where buildings leaned on one another for support like drunken old men. He stopped before a large, ramshackle building that looked like a warehouse that had lost a war. It was fortified with scrap metal and heavy timbers. A makeshift fortress against the poverty outside. The cursed insignia had come to a stop within. Naruto didn't enter. He became one with the shadows of a neighboring hovel, his presence fading until he was little more than a patch of deeper darkness. He listened. 70 holy coins for a trinket like this. You're getting senile, old man wrong. The voice was sharp, youthful, and laced with a confidence that belied her age. It was the thief. A deep, gravelly voice rumbled in response. It's a magic-imbued insignia from a noble house, felt. The materials alone are worth 50. I'm giving you a 20 coin profit for 5 minutes of work. My generosity knows no bounds. Your generosity stinks of cheap liquor and mothballs, the girl, felt, shot back. This thing practically glows. Anyone could have snatched it. The risk was minimal. I'll take 180, and that's my final offer. I have to move this thing, and any buyer worth his salt will know it's hot. That's risk on my end. 85, and you throw in a piece of that dried meat I know you're hiding. There was a grumble, followed by the sound of a heavy object being placed on a counter. Fine. You're a menace to my retirement, you know that. Naruto remained perfectly still, processing the exchange. It was a negotiation, but beneath the mercenary banter, he detected a current of familiarity, of practiced routine. They were not just business associates. A flicker of warmth, almost familial, existed between the giant called Rom and the girl named Felt. His vigil was short-lived. A new sound reached him from the street, heavy, confident footsteps. 3 men. He shifted his gaze, his eyes piercing the gloom with ease. They were broad-shouldered and carried crude weapons, a club, a rusty short sword, a set of iron knuckles. Their souls were dim, clouded with the muddy shadows of cruelty and petty ambition. But what drew Naruto's attention was the familiar, grasping shadow of the curse on the insignia, which now had 3 fainter, but identical echoes clinging to these men. They were connected. The trap was about to spring. The heavy door to the loot house creaked open. Well, a sneering voice said. Look what we have here. A little rat and a giant cockroach. Felt's sharp voice cut through the air. What do you want, Tun? I'm in the middle of a transaction. Your transaction is over, another, deeper voice replied. The client who hired us to track that insignia wants to negotiate directly with the holder. And her method of negotiation is sharp. Naruto saw the tension spike inside the warehouse. Felt's small, chaotic light flared with anger and fear. Old man Rom's steady, large presence solidified into a wall of protective intent as he hefted a massive club from behind the counter. Get behind me, Felt, Rom growled. Now, there's no need for that, the third man said with a laugh. Just hand over the girl and the shiny, and we'll leave your little nest intact. A beat of silence. Then, the sharp, defiant cry from Felt. Like hell. The situation devolved instantly. The sound of Rom's club smashing against the counter, used as a shield. The clang of steel. A pained grunt from the old giant. Naruto pushed himself away from the wall. The time for observation was over. He didn't burst through the door. He moved to the side of the building, to a boarded-up window. His hand rested on the thick, rotting wood. There was no sound, no flash of power. The molecular bonds in the wood simply unlocked. The boards and the wall around them turned to a fine, silent dust that scattered on the breeze, leaving a perfect, man-sized opening. Naruto stepped through it and into the dim, cavernous space of the loot house. The scene was exactly as he'd perceived. Old man Rom, a veritable giant of a man, was holding 2 of the thugs at bay with his enormous club, a shallow cut bleeding on his forearm. The third thug, the one with the iron knuckles, had cornered Felt against a pile of scrap. He was reaching for her, a leering grin on his face. They didn't notice him. His entrance had been as silent as the grave. The thug reaching for Felt was the first. Naruto crossed the 10-meter distance between them in a single, fluid motion. It wasn't a burst of speed that ripped the air, it was more fundamental than that. It was as if he simply ceased to be in one place and began to exist in another. The intervening space an irrelevant detail. His hand, open and calm, chopped down on the man's extended wrist. There was a sickening, wet snap of bone. The thug's leer dissolved into a mask of pure, uncomprehending agony. Before a scream could even form in his throat, Naruto's other hand struck his temple with surgical precision. The man's eyes rolled back into his head, and he crumpled to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. The other 2, alerted by the sound of their companion's collapse, spun around. Their eyes widened, first at their fallen comrade, then at the silent, blonde-haired figure standing where he hadn't been a second before. Who the hell are you? The one with the sword snarled, taking a step back. Naruto didn't answer. His expression was one of placid disinterest. as if he were dealing with a minor annoyance, like swatting a fly. He took a single step forward. The thug with the club roared and charged, swinging his weapon in a wide, clumsy arc. Naruto didn't dodge. He moved inside the swing, the heavy wood whistling harmlessly past his ear. His hand shot out, not in a fist, but with his fingers extended and rigid. He struck the man's elbow, shattering the joint with another precise, brutal impact. The club fell from a nerveless hand. A follow-up strike to the throat, just hard enough to crush the windpipe without being lethal, sent the man to his knees. Gasping and choking, his face turning a shade of purple. 2 down. Less than 5 seconds had passed. The last man, the one with the sword, was frozen, his face pale with terror. He looked from his 2 incapacitated companions to the serene, blue-eyed man who had dispatched them with such contemptuous ease. The predatory confidence was gone, replaced by the primal fear of a prey animal facing a creature beyond its comprehension. He screamed, a high-pitched sound of pure panic, and turned to flee. He didn't make it 2 steps. Naruto's foot connected with the back of his knee, buckling the leg with a loud crack. As the man fell forward, Naruto caught him by the collar, spun him around, and delivered a sharp, open-palmed blow to his forehead. The man went limp, his consciousness extinguished. Silence returned to the loot house, broken only by the pained gasps of the second thug and the stunned, heavy breathing of Old Man Rom. Naruto stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the 3 broken forms. He hadn't broken a sweat. His clothes weren't even ruffled. He turned his calm, analytical gaze towards the giant and the girl, who were staring at him, their expressions a mixture of shock, awe, and deep suspicion. It was at that moment that the main door was thrown open with a crash, and the silver-haired half-elf from the market square rushed in, a shard of ice already forming in her palm. "Stop right there, thief!" She stopped, her words dying in her throat as she took in the scene. The 3 groaning men on the floor, the giant tenderly holding his bleeding arm. The small blonde girl pressed against a wall, and this strange, handsome man standing in the middle of it all, looking as if he had just been out for a casual stroll. What happened here?" she asked, her voice filled with confusion. Naruto ignored her for a moment. His gaze settled on Felt, who was clutching the stolen insignia to her chest like a talisman. He took a step towards her. She flinched, pressing herself further against the wall. He stopped, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm not going to harm you," he said, his voice calm and even, carrying a strand resonance that seemed to soothe the frayed nerves in the room. He nodded towards the insignia. "That trinket, it carries a dark echo. It was meant to be a beacon, to lead someone far more dangerous than those 3 to you." He looked at Felt, his blue eyes holding an unnerving depth. "It is a curse. Let me silence it." Before anyone could protest or even fully comprehend his words, he held out his hand, palm up. A gentle, warm light, the color of the dawn, began to emanate from his palm. It was not the sharp, cold light of the half-elf's ice magic, but something organic, vital, and overwhelmingly pure. He didn't touch the insignia. The light itself seemed to reach out, caressing the metal. The intricate, shadowy curse that only he could see, the black, grasping hand, began to visibly wither under the light's touch. It flaked away, not like ash, but like a shadow losing its claim on reality, dissolving into nothingness. The malevolent pulse it emitted ceased. The faint, dark stain on the metal vanished, leaving it gleaming, pure, and utterly inert. The light in Naruto's hand faded, plunging the room back into its natural dimness. Felt, Old Man Rom, and the newly arrived Emilia stared, mouths agape, at the now harmless insignia, then back at Naruto. What he had just done was not any magic they knew. It wasn't dispelling, which left traces. It wasn't overpowering, which left scorch marks. He had simply unmade it. He had erased it from existence. A heavy silence descended, thick with questions that no one knew how to ask. It was broken by a sudden, precipitous drop in temperature. A frost, wholly unnatural, began to creep across the floorboards from the open doorway. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with a palpable, cloying bloodlust that made the hairs on everyone's arms stand on end. A figure stepped through the doorway, silhouetted against the fading light of the slums. A woman, dressed in a form-fitting black dress, her movements possessing a seductive, predatory grace. She smiled, a wide, beautiful smile that did not reach her dark, empty eyes. My, she purred, her voice a silken promise of violence. I was expecting to find a scared little girl and some broken thugs. Her gaze swept past the others, dismissing them as irrelevant, and landed on Naruto. Her smile widened, gaining a sliver of genuine, carnivorous interest. But to find something like you, this evening has just become far more entertaining. Elsa Granhire drew her long, curved kukri blades, the steel seeming to drink the very light from the room. Her eyes, fixed on Naruto, held no doubt, no fear. Only the joyous anticipation of a gourmet who had just discovered a rare and exquisite new dish to carve. Chapter 1 End. The air in the loot house didn't just grow cold, it became a solid thing. A presence that pressed in from all sides, heavy with the promise of imminent, joyous violence. The frost creeping across the floor was a symptom of the killing intent radiating from the woman in the doorway. A chill that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the soul. Her name was Elsa Granhire, and she was a predator who had just found a worthy hunt. Emilia, who had been about to reprimand froze, her hand instinctively going to the small green crystal on her chest. Old man Rom, despite his bleeding arm, moved to place his massive frame between Elsa and Felt, his expression grim. Felt herself seemed to shrink, the street-smart defiance in her eyes replaced by raw, primal fear. They knew her. They knew what she was. Naruto alone remained unmoved by the oppressive atmosphere. To him, Elsa's bloodlust was just another shadow, albeit a tempestuous and razor-sharp one, clinging to a soul that was a tangled knot of brokenness and glee. He saw the strange, cursed mechanism within her that allowed for her unnatural resilience, a faint, dark thrumming that promised to mend what was broken. He analyzed it, dissected it, and understood it in the space of a single heartbeat. "Get out of my way, Gutsack," Elsa purred, her eyes still locked on Naruto. "I only have eyes for the main dish tonight. The rest of you are just garnish." Naruto took a step forward, positioning himself squarely between Elsa and the others. "Your business is with them," he said, his voice a low, calm counterpoint to the rising tension. "But your fight is with me. They are not part of it." Elsa's smile was a slash of white in the gloom. "Oh, are you protecting them? How wonderfully heroic. I do so love to carve up heroes. They bleed so prettily." She moved. She didn't run. She flowed. A black ripple in the fabric of reality. Her speed was supernatural, a blur aimed at Naruto's throat. To the others, she was a phantom, an unavoidable strike. To Naruto, her trajectory was as clear as a line drawn in the sand. He didn't move to dodge. Instead, he raised his left hand, palm open. Corona Aegis, a shield of pure, golden light, translucent and shimmering like spun glass, bloomed into existence a foot in front of him. It was not a physical barrier of force, but a manifestation of absolute solar authority. Elsa's kukri, which could slice through steel as if it were parchment, met the shield with a high-pitched scream of protesting metal. It didn't bounce off. The edge of the blade, the very molecules of the steel, began to sublimate upon contact, dissolve into superheated vapor without any visible flame. Elsa's eyes widened in genuine shock. She recoiled, her dancer's grace saving her from having her entire blade unmade. She stared at the shimmering, silent shield, then at Naruto. Her predatory glee momentarily replaced by disbelief. "What is that?" "A line you will not cross," Naruto stated. He took another step forward, and the shield moved with him, an extension of his will. He was not defending, he was advancing. This unexpected resistance, this utter negation of her power, seemed to break Elsa's composure. Her beautiful face twisted into a snarl of frustration. And she attacked again, this time a whirlwind of steel. She was no longer aiming for a single kill but trying to overwhelm him, her blades a flurry of cuts and slashes from every conceivable angle. Each one aimed at a vital point. The Corona Aegis held. Every strike was met with the same silent, inexorable consumption of her blades. Sparks, brighter than normal, flew as tiny fragments of her weapons were turned to incandescent gas. The air filled with the scent of ozone and hot metal. Inside his golden bubble of tranquility, Naruto watched her, his expression unchanged. He was analyzing her patterns, her tells, the minute shifts in her weight. He saw her ferocity, but also the inelegance of her rage. She was a master of killing, but a novice at true combat. Behind him, Emilia, Rom, and Felt could only watch in stunned silence. They were shielded from the pressure of the fight, witnesses to a battle that defied the known laws of magic and swordsmanship. Emilia, a powerful spirit user in her own right, could not comprehend the nature of his power. It was not fire, not light, not force. It was something else entirely. Something absolute. "Stand still and let me gut you," Elsa shrieked, her facade of seductive calm completely shattered. She fainted high and then lunged low, aiming to sweep his legs out from under him. Naruto judged it was enough. He let the aegis dissolve. The sudden absence of the shield caught Elsa off guard. Her blade, expecting resistance, swept through empty air. In that single, unbalanced moment, Naruto acted. He moved forward, stepping on her leading foot, anchoring her to the spot. His left hand shot out and seized her sword wrist in a grip of iron. His right hand, moving in a blur, struck the back of her other hand, sending her second kukri flying across the room to embed itself in a wooden pillar. He twisted the wrist he held. There was a sharp crack of bone, and Elsa cried out in pain as her fingers went limp, her last weapon clattering to the floor. With the same fluid motion, he spun her around, her back pressed against his chest, his forearm locked under her chin, a single thumb pressed against the carotid artery in her neck. The fight was over. It had taken less than 30 seconds. "It's finished," Naruto said, his voice calm in her ear. "The curse that animates you can heal broken bones and torn flesh. But it cannot restart a heart that I choose to stop. And it cannot reattach a head I choose to remove. Leave." Elsa was trembling, not from fear, but from a mixture of agony and sheer, unadulterated fury. To be defeated, to be so completely and effortlessly dominated, was a violation of her very being. He could feel the dark energy within her churning, trying to knit her shattered wrist back together, but his grip, imbued with a sliver of his own authority, seemed to inhibit the process. "I'll kill you," she hissed, her voice a venomous rasp. "I will find you, and I will spill your bowels all over the street." "You will try," Naruto replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "And you will fail." He increased the pressure on her neck slightly, a silent promise of the finality he could deliver. For a long, tense moment, she remained rigid. Then, with a guttural snarl, she stomped hard on his instep. It was a desperate, spiteful act, and while it would have shattered the foot of a normal man, Naruto barely registered it. But he used the opportunity to release her, pushing her away from him. Elsa stumbled forward, clutching her broken wrist. She shot him a look of pure, murderous hatred, then darted for the door, melting back into the shadows of the slum from which she came. Her parting threat hung in the air like a foul odor. Silence descended once more, thicker and more profound than before. Naruto turned to face the room's other occupants. Old man Ram was staring at him with wide-eyed awe. Felt looked at him as if he were a monster far more terrifying than the one who had just fled. Emilia was the first to find her voice. You drove off the bowel hunter," she whispered, her amethyst eyes huge. Just like that, Naruto's gaze fell on the insignia, which Felt had dropped during the commotion. He picked it up and held it out to Emilia. "This belongs to you, I believe." Emilia took it, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you," she said, her voice still trembling slightly. "Thank you for everything. I don't know how I can possibly repay you." She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not a vagrant or a mercenary, but a being of immense, quiet power. "You must be exhausted. Please, allow me to offer you a place to rest. My patron's manor is nearby. It is safe, and you would be an honored guest." Naruto considered it. His senses were still picking up on the far more significant, ancient shadows he had felt from a distance, and their source was in the direction she was pointing. That place, this, patron's manor, was a nexus. Going there was the logical next step. "I accept," he said simply. The journey to the Rosewall L. Mather's manor was a surreal affair. Emilia, having retrieved her spirit companion, Puck, a small, floating cat-like creature, led the way. She kept casting glances at Naruto, 1,000 questions warring for dominance in her eyes. Naruto walked beside her, his calm presence a stark contrast to her flustered state. Felt and Ram had refused the offer. The girl stating she'd rather sleep in a gutter than be indebted to a noble, a sentiment Naruto quietly respected. They arrived at a wrought iron gate that opened onto a long, winding driveway. At its end stood the manor, a sprawling Gothic structure of dark stone and steep, pointed roofs. It looked like something out of a dark fairy tale, beautiful and deeply unsettling. As they approached, the front doors opened, and two young maids, identical in every way except for the color of their hair and eyes, stood waiting. One had pink hair and red eyes, the other blue hair and blue eyes. The air around the manor was thick with secrets. Naruto could feel them, ancient curses woven into the very foundation, layers of manipulation and sorrow clinging to the walls like ivy. And the source of the strongest disturbance was the man who now appeared behind the maids. He was tall and slender, dressed in the flamboyant, colorful attire of a court jester, his face painted with purple markings under his eyes. His long, dark blue hair was impeccably styled, and his smile was wide and unnerving. Emi-Lia-sama, welcome ho-me, and with a new friend, I see. How delightful. His voice was melodic and stretched his vowels, a carefully constructed affectation. But Naruto's soul's truth pierced the facade. He saw past the clownish exterior, past the immense magical power the man wielded. He saw the soul within. And it was ancient, calculating, and stained with shadows so old they had become part of its very fabric. This was Rosewall L. Mathers, and he was a creature of profound and patient danger. Rosewall, Emilia said, relieved. This is, well, I don't know his name. He saved my life. Rosewall's mismatched eyes, one yellow, one blue, landed on Naruto. His smile didn't falter, but Naruto felt the man's magical senses probe him, trying to gauge his strength, his nature. It was like a child throwing pebbles at a mountain. Is that so, Tilda? Then we are greatly in your debt, Mr. Naruto, he supplied. His gaze met Rosewall's, and for a moment, the clown's smile tightened at the edges. Naruto's eyes were not reflecting light, they seemed to be absorbing it, and in their depths. Rosewall could see a calm that was more unnerving than any threat. The pink-haired one is Ram. The blue-haired one is Rem, Rosewall said, gesturing to the maids. They will see to your needs. Ram offered a curt, dismissive nod. Rem gave a polite, perfect bow, murmuring, it is a pleasure to meet you, honored guest. But as Naruto's gaze passed over them, his internal vision, the sight granted by his authority, saw what no one else could. He looked at Ram, and beneath her sharp, composed exterior, he saw the wound. It was not physical. It was a gaping, spectral hole in her very being, located on her forehead where something vital had once been. It was a constant, draining vortex of energy, a curse of incompleteness that she bore with stoic silence. Then he looked at Rem. Her politeness was a mask, a shield. Her soul was shrouded in a suffocating, dark nebula of self-loathing and guilt. It was a shadow she had woven herself, but it was anchored to her sister's wound. He could feel its crushing weight. The belief that she was worthless, a pale imitation, the one responsible for Ram's incompleteness. He understood their entire tragic history, the core of their beings, in that single, silent glance. Later, at a formal dinner in a grand, candlelit dining hall, the psychological chess match began. Rosewall, seated at the head of the long table, directed a stream of seemingly frivolous questions at Naruto. Each one a cleverly disguised probe. He asked about his homeland, his skills, his intentions, all couched in his bizarre, sing-song manner. nd what brings a powerful fellow such as yourself to our humble kingdom, Naruto-kun? Circumstance, Naruto replied, his answers brief and deflecting, offering no purchase for Rosewall's hooks. He could feel the man's frustration mounting behind the painted smile. Finally, Naruto decided to seize control of the conversation. He set down his fork and looked towards the maids, who were standing silently against the far wall. His gaze settled on Ram. You have carried a wound for a long time, he said, his voice cutting through Rosewall's planned monologue. The table fell silent. Ram's eyes widened slightly. Rem stiffened, a flicker of hostility in her gaze. It is an injustice, Naruto continued, his voice soft but resonant. A flaw in your design that was never meant to be. He looked directly at her, his blue eyes holding a profound sincerity. With your consent, I can correct it. Ram stared at him, her composure cracking for the first time. I don't know what you're talking about. Her denial was instinctual, a shield raised after years of guarding the secret pain. Do not speak to my sister in such a familiar manner, guest Sama, Rem said, her voice dripping with icy formality, her body tensed to intervene. Rosewall watched, his smile gone, replaced by an expression of intense, sharp curiosity. This was an unexpected move. This was not in his book. I have seen your power, Naruto-sama, Emilia said, her voice filled with trust. Ram, please, at least listen to him. Naruto focused on Ram, ignoring the others. I am not offering a patch or a remedy. I am offering restoration. I can make you whole. The word, whole, hung in the air. It was a concept Ram had long since abandoned. She looked at Naruto, at the absolute conviction in his eyes, and saw not pity, but possibility. After a long, tense silence, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. That was all he needed. Rem, Naruto said calmly. Stand with your sister. She will need you. Hesitantly, Rem moved to Ram's side, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. Naruto rose from his chair and walked towards them. He stopped in front of Ram and raised his hand, not to touch her, but to hover his palm an inch from her forehead. He closed his eyes and channeled the unmaking light. It started not as a flash, but as a gentle, resonant hum that seemed to warm the very air in the room. A soft, golden light, liquid and pure, seeped from his palm. Only he could see the spectral wound in Ram's soul begin to stitch itself closed under the light's influence. The draining vortex slowed, stabilized, and then sealed completely. Then, the miracle became physical. A gasp escaped Emilia's lips. On Ram's forehead, where there had been only smooth skin, a tiny, glowing bud of pink crystal began to emerge. It grew slowly, deliberately, like a time-lapse film of a blooming flower. It spiraled outwards, shaping itself with impossible perfection, the light within it pulsating with a healthy, vibrant life. Within 30 seconds, it had formed completely, a perfect, crystalline demonic horn, identical to the one Rem possessed. The golden light from Naruto's hand faded. He lowered his arm. Ram stumbled, her knees buckling. The constant, lifelong drain on her mana, a weakness she had grown so accustomed to that she no longer noticed it, was gone. A flood of energy, of vitality, rushed through her, so overwhelming that it made her dizzy. He raised a trembling hand and touched the horn. It was real. It was warm. It was hers. She was whole. Tears she didn't know she still possessed welled in her eyes. Rosewall was on his feet, his chair knocked over behind him. The painted smile was gone, utterly erased. In its place was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock, a disbelief so profound it bordered on terror. His carefully laid plans, his centuries of following the gospel of the tome of wisdom, all of it had just been rendered meaningless by an act that should have been impossible. But the most powerful reaction came from Rem. She stared at her sister's new horn, her mind unable to process what she was seeing. Her guilt, the crushing weight that had defined her every waking moment, the very foundation of her identity as the lesser sister who had to atone, was built on the bedrock of Ram's loss. And that bedrock had just been turned to dust. She dropped to her knees, a choked sob escaping her throat. Her body trembled as years of self-inflicted torment and desperate love came pouring out in a flood of tears. She looked from her sister's whole, healthy face to the man who had performed this casual, godlike act of creation. Her suspicion, her hostility, all of it was incinerated in the furnace of this miracle. It was replaced by something far more potent, something absolute. It was reverence. It was awe. It was a devotion, so total and consuming that it instantly reshaped her entire world, placing him at its very center. The chapter ended with Rem on the floor, weeping tears of impossible joy, her blue eyes, reflecting the soft, pink glow of her sister's new horn, looking up at Naruto as if he were the sun itself. Chapter 2 End. The aftermath of the miracle was a strange, suspended silence. For 2 days, an unspoken truce seemed to settle over the Rosewall manor. Rosewall himself became scarce, his usual flamboyant intrusions replaced by a distant, watchful observation. The painted smile was back in place, but his eyes, whenever they chanced to fall upon Naruto, held a new and unfamiliar emotion, caution. He was recalculating, and the presence of a variable that was not accounted for in his precious tome of Whis. Dom had clearly unsettled him to his ancient core. Ram was a study in quiet rediscovery. The sharp, cynical edge to her personality remained, but it was no longer a primary defense mechanism. With the ceaseless, draining ache of her missing horn gone, a lightness had returned to her. She moved with more energy, her verbal spars with Rosewall held a new fire, and she would occasionally, when she thought no one was watching, raise a hand to gently touch the perfect, pink horn on her forehead, a small, secret smile gracing her lips. Her gratitude towards Naruto was not effusive, it was expressed in small, practical ways. A perfectly prepared cup of tea left by his door, his quarters kept impeccably clean, and a subtle but significant decrease in the dismissiveness in her tone when she addressed him. Emilia's admiration, already considerable, had blossomed into something approaching discipleship. She peppered him with questions about his power, his homeland, and his philosophy, her idealistique. See nature finding a powerful anchor in his calm strength. She saw in him not just a savior, but a living, breathing blueprint for a better world, a confirmation that goodness and overwhelming power were not mutually exclusive. But the most profound change was in Rem. Her transformation was absolute. The polite but distant servant was gone, replaced by a warrior priestess who had found her deity. Her devotion was a palpable energy. A silent, unwavering orbit she now maintained around Naruto. Her blue eyes followed him with an intensity that was both fierce and gentle. She anticipated his every need, not with the rehearsed perfection of a maid, but with the intuitive, profound understanding of a true believer. Her guilt had been cauterized, and in its place, a new purpose had bloomed, to serve, protect, and champion the man who had not only saved her from a killer but had, with a single, gentle touch, redeemed her sister's past and her own tormented soul. The fragile peace was shattered on the morning of the third day. Naruto was in the manor's grand library, reading a book on the world's geography, when Rem burst into the room. Her usual flawless composure was gone, her face pale with panic. Her maid's uniform slightly disheveled from running. "Guest Sama," she began, her voice tight with urgency, before correcting herself out of habit. "Naruto-sama." Naruto looked up from his book, his expression calm. "What is it, Rem?" "It's Arlem village," she said, her chest heaving as she caught her breath. "There has been an attack. The village children, several of them went into the forest to play last night and did not return. This morning, one of the search parties found bite marks. My beast bites." Emilia, who had been nearby, rushed into the library, Huck floating anxiously beside her. "My beasts, so close to the village. The village shaman believes it is a curse," Rem continued, her professional demeanor barely masking the terror in her voice. "The Wolgarm. The bite passes the curse. And if the victim is not killed by a shaman's blade before the next full moon," her voice trailed off, the implication hanging heavy in the air, "the bitten would become Wolgarm themselves. A boy, the son of the village chief, was found wandering near the forest's edge. He was bitten. He says the others were dragged deeper into the woods." Huck zipped around anxiously. "Wolgarm are pack hunters. If they took the children, they won't just leave them. This is bad, Leah. Really bad." Emilia turned to Naruto, her face a mask of worry. "We have to do something. We have to find them before the pack, before it's too late." Naruto closed his book, the soft thud echoing in the tense silence. He stood up, his movements unhurried. "Rem, how many children are missing?" "5, Naruto-sama. 4 girls and 1 boy." He nodded, his mind already working. He walked to one of the library's large windows, which overlooked the sprawling, dark forest that bordered Rosewall's domain. He closed his eyes, and his senses expanded, his divine authority reaching out to perceive the world on a level the others could not. He didn't look for the children. He looked for the sickness. And he found it. The forest, which to a normal eye looked like any other, was, to his sight, deeply diseased. A dark, malignant aura, a web of curse energy, pulsed from its heart, spreading through the soil and clinging to the oldest trees like a fungus. The Wolgarm were not just a pack of beasts living in the woods, they were the symptoms, the fever blisters on a land that was fundamentally infected. A shaman's blade could kill a single beast, but it could not cure the disease. "A piecemeal rescue will fail," Naruto said, opening his eyes. His gaze was clear and decisive. We would be fighting the symptoms while ignoring the cause. The beasts are a symptom. The sickness is in the soil, in the trees themselves. A curse has taken root here. We will not just cull the pack, we will burn out the disease. Emilia and Rem stared at him, not quite understanding. He turned to them, assuming the natural mantle of command. His voice was calm, but held an undeniable authority that left no room for argument. Emilia, you and Puck will come with me. Your spirit arts will be useful for locating the children quickly. Rem, he said, his gaze softening slightly as he looked at her, your role is the most important. Return to Arlem village. Gather the villagers and keep them safe. Do not let anyone enter the forest, no matter what they hear. Your strength will be their shield. Can you do that? Rem, who had been trembling with a mixture of fear and a desperate desire for action, felt a wave of calm wash over her at his words. He was not just giving her an order, he was entrusting her with the safety of her people. He saw her as a shield, a protector. Her spine straightened, and the panic in her eyes was replaced by a familiar, fierce loyalty. Yes, Naruto-sama, she said, bowing deeply. I will not fail you. With that, she turned and ran from the room, her purpose clear. Leah, are you sure about this? Puck whispered to Emilia. He's talking about cleansing a whole forest. Emilia looked at Naruto, at the absolute, unshakable confidence in his posture. She remembered the impossible miracle with Ram's horn, the effortless defeat of Elsa Granhired. Her faith in him was absolute. Yes, Puck, I'm sure. Good, Naruto said. Then let's begin. He didn't walk towards the manor's exit. He walked back to the window, placing a hand on the glass. The direct route is faster. With a soft hum, the unmaking light flowed from his hand. The glass and the stone wall beneath it dissolved into silent dust, creating a perfect, arch-shaped opening that led out onto the manor's grounds. He stepped through it, Emilia and Puck following in stunned awe, and took to the air, rising above the manor in a gentle, controlled levitation. From his vantage point, the entire dark wood was laid out before him like a map. Stay close, he commanded, and shot forward, a streak of silent, golden light headed directly for the heart of the cursed forest. The moment they entered the airspace above the trees, the atmosphere changed. The air grew cold and heavy. A low, guttural growling echoed from the shadows below, a chorus of hundreds of hungry beasts. The oppressive aura of the curse was a physical weight, pressing down on them. There are so many of them, Emilia breathed, her eyes wide with fear. They are irrelevant, Naruto said, his senses sweeping the area. His soul's truth cut through the physical and magical clutter, searching for the small, frightened lights of the children's souls. There, he said, pointing to a clearing deeper in the woods, where several ancient, gnarled totems stood, pulsating with a dark energy. That is the nest. The curse is anchored to those totems. And the children are there. He descended, Emilia and Puck following closely. They landed silently on the branch of a massive tree overlooking the clearing. The sight below was grim. The 5 missing children were huddled together at the base of a large, gnarled totem, crying and trembling with fear. They were surrounded by a massive pack of Wolgarm. At least 50 of the wolf-like beasts, their eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. They were not attacking, merely circling, as if waiting for a signal from an alpha that stood near the central totem, a beast larger and more scarred than the others. We have to get them out of there, Emilia whispered, preparing to summon her ice magic. No, Naruto said, placing a calming hand on her shoulder. If we attack, the pack will swarm them. We will not fight their battle. We will end their world. He pushed off from the branch, rising into the air until he hovered directly over the center of the clearing. The Wolgarm below looked up, snarling and growling at this new, radiant threat. The alpha let out a deafening howl. Naruto paid them no mind. He closed his eyes and held his hands out to his sides, palms up. He drew upon the star caged in his chest. The air around him began to shimmer and distort with heat. Light, pure and impossibly bright, began to coalesce above his head. It gathered and compressed, folding in on itself again and again, until it formed a sphere of roiling, golden plasma, a miniature, silent sun. It bathed the dark clearing in a brilliant, divine light. A light that made the shadows recoil and the cursed totems smoke. The Wolgarm whined and shielded their eyes, their red glow paling in comparison to the celestial radiance above them. The terrified children stopped crying, their faces turned upward in silent, tear-streaked awe. Emilia, watching from the branch, had to shield her own eyes. The sheer power radiating from him was staggering, dwarfing anything she had ever felt from Rosewall or any other mage. It felt like standing next to the dawn itself. Naruto opened his eyes. They glowed with the same golden intensity as the star above him. He looked down upon the cursed wood, his expression one of serene judgment. Then, he unleashed the sun. He didn't throw it as a projectile. He commanded it to expand. A silent, perfect wave of pure, golden light, the unmaking light on a cosmic scale, erupted outwards from him. It was not a destructive blast of heat or force. It was a wave of conceptual purification. The light washed through the clearing and into the forest beyond. It passed through the healthy trees, the rocks, and the soil without harming them, leaving them bathed in a warm, golden afterglow. But anything born of the curse, anything tainted by the witch's shadow, was instantly and utterly unmade. The Wolgarm pack dissolved. One moment they were snarling beasts of fang and claw, the next they were dissolving into motes of purified, glittering dust that drifted harmlessly into the air. The alpha beast let out a final, silent howl as it, too, was erased from existence. The ancient, gnarled totems that anchored the curse crumbled. Their dark magic neutralized, turning to harmless dirt and splinters. The wave of light continued its silent, inexorable journey, spreading through the entire forest in seconds. Everywhere it passed, the oppressive, dark aura was annihilated. The sickness in the soil was purged. The very air felt lighter, cleaner. The unnatural chill vanished, replaced by a gentle warmth. When the light faded, Naruto descended, landing softly in the center of the now pristine clearing. The forest was no longer a place of horror, but one of serene, sun-dappled beauty. He turned his attention to the children, who were still staring at the spot where the monsters had been, their fear slowly being replaced by utter bewilderment. Emilia flew down to join him, her face a mask of disbelief. You cleansed it all," she stammered. In an instant, "The sickness is gone," Naruto confirmed. He walked toward the children. As he got closer, he saw that two of them, a small girl Wi. Th Pigtails and the boy Rem had mentioned, had fresh, bleeding bite marks on their arms. The Wolgarm curse was already in their blood, a faint but virulent shadow. He knelt before them, his expression gentle. The children, who should have been terrified of this strange, powerful man, felt only a sense of calm and safety emanating from him. "You're hurt," he said softly to the little girl. "Let me help." He placed his palm over her wound. A soft, warm light glowed, far gentler than the miniature sun he had created. The curse within her blood, the microscopic shadow seeking to corrupt her, was effortlessly erased. The bite mark itself knitted closed, leaving behind only smooth, unblemished skin. He did the same for the boy, his healing just as swift and perfect. He stood up and looked at the 5 healthy, albeit shaken, children. "Let's get you home." When they returned to the edge of the forest, Arlem village was in a state of quiet panic, held in check only by Rem's formidable presence. She stood before the anxious villagers, her flail in hand, a stoic guardian preventing any from rushing foolishly into the woods. Her head snapped up as she saw Naruto and Emilia emerge from the now bright forest. The 5 missing children in tow, completely unharmed. A collective gasp went through the crowd of villagers. Parents rushed forward, sweeping their children into tearful, joyous embraces. The village chief, a burly, bearded man, rushed to his son, checking him over frantically. He saw the torn sleeve where he had been bitten but found no wound beneath it. He's healed. The curse is gone," he exclaimed, his voice thick with disbelief and relief. The villagers all began talking at once, their fear replaced by burgeoning awe. They looked from the healthy children to the forest, which no longer felt like a place of terrifying darkness, but a place of peace. And then they looked at Naruto, the calm, blonde-haired man who had walked out of that forest and returned their children, whole and hale. They didn't see a knight or a mage. They saw a miracle worker. A savior. The village chief fell to his knees. "Thank you," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "On behalf of my village, thank you, Divine One." One by one, the other villagers bowed their heads in silent, reverent gratitude. Naruto simply gave a small nod of acknowledgement. His gaze found Rem, who was standing slightly apart from the crowd. Her blue eyes shining with unshed tears of relief and a devotion so profound it was a physical force. He had saved her sister's soul, and now he had saved her people. He walked over to her. The crowd parting before him. He stood before her for a moment in the warm, late afternoon sun. "You did well, Rem," he said quietly. "You were their shield." Rem looked up at him, her heart swelling with a pride and love so fierce it almost took her breath away. In that moment, she made a silent, solemn vow. He had been their shield. From now on, she would be his. No matter the cost, no matter the enemy, her life, her strength, her very being, were now pledged to the service of the sun. Chapter 3 End. The ripples from the cleansing of the Arlem wood spread far faster than Naruto could have anticipated. News of a forest-sized curse being erased in an instant, of 5 children returned from the clutches of a Wolgarm pack not just alive but with their curse wounds miraculously healed, was a tale too fantastic to be contained. It traveled from the village to the capital on the tongues of traders and travelers, morphing and growing with each retelling until it became the stuff of myth. In the taverns and markets of Lugnica, whispers grew of a mysterious, blonde-haired man with the power of a god, an ally to the controversial half-elf candidate, Emilia. This raw, PID ascent from anonymity to legend was the reason a formal, non-negotiable summons arrived at the Rosewall Manor, delivered by a stern-faced royal knight and bearing the unbroken wax seal of the Council of Sages. Emilia stared at the scroll as if it were a venomous snake. "The royal selection is being officially convened," she read, her voice barely a whisper. "All 5 candidates are to present themselves before the council and the knight captain. They've moved up the date. It's because of you," she said, looking at Naruto. "Your actions, they've forced their hand. Let them force it," Naruto replied calmly. He was sitting in an armchair by a window, observing the way the afternoon light fell across the gardens. "Their fear is a tool. We can use it. Use it. They're going to tear me apart." Emilia's anxiety was a palpable force in the room. "They despise me. They'll use you as another reason to disqualify me, an alliance with a powerful, unknown foreign entity. They'll say I'm a threat to the kingdom." Naruto turned his gaze from the window to her. He saw her flickering light, the purity of her ideals being battered by her deep-seated insecurities and the trauma of a lifetime of prejudice. He rose from his chair and stood before her. He didn't offer empty platitudes or promises of protection. He offered something far more valuable, a strategy. "Your posture," he began, his voice quiet but firm. "You are slouching. It is a defensive position, an apology for your own existence. Straighten your back." Emilia, surprised, instinctively did as he said. "Better. Now, your breathing. It is shallow. From the top of your lungs. It is the breathing of a frightened animal. Breathe deeper, from your diaphragm. Feel the air fill you. It will calm your heart and steady your voice." He waited as she took a few slow, deep breaths, her frantic energy beginning to subside. "Finally, your eyes. When you enter that room, they will look at you with hatred. Do not look away. Do not look at the floor. Meet their gaze. But do not meet it with defiance or fear. Meet it with conviction. You are not there to beg for their approval. You are there to state why your vision for this kingdom is superior to theirs. You believe all people deserve to be treated with fairness and kindness, do you not?" "Yes, of course I do," she said, her voice finding a spark of its usual fire. "Then that is your authority," Naruto concluded. "It is a truth more powerful than their titles or their history of hate. They will try to make you feel small because your potential makes them feel small. Do not let their fear become your own. Let your heart speak. I will handle the rest." Emilia looked at him, truly looked at him. He wasn't just offering to be her shield, he was teaching her how to forge her own armor. A wave of profound gratitude washed over her, and for the first time since the summons had arrived, she felt not dread, but a flicker of determination. "Okay," she said, her voice steady. "Okay, I can do that." The royal castle of Lugnica was a masterpiece of architecture, a testament to centuries of power and wealth. Its white marble halls were vast enough to humble armies, its tapestries depicted glorious victories. And its vaulted ceilings were high enough to hold the sky. Yet the atmosphere within was suffocating, heavy with the oppressive weight of tradition and the stench of arrogance. In a gilded antechamber outside the throne room, the 5 candidates for the royal selection waited. The air was thick with a tension that could be cut with a knife. Priscilla Bariel, the self-proclaimed Sun Princess, lounged on a velvet chaise, fanning herself with theatrical indolence. She was a woman of stunning, fiery beauty, dressed in an extravagant crimson gown that left little to the imagination. She projected an aura of absolute self-importance, refusing to even acknowledge the presence of the others, though Naruto noted her eyes, sharp and intelligent, missing nothing. Anastasia Hoshin, the diminutive head of the Hoshin Trading Company, stood with her retinue, which included the cat-like demi-human Ricardo and the knight Julius Euclius. Dressed in a fine fur-trimmed dress that spoke of wealth rather than nobility, she observed everyone with the shrewd, calculating gaze of a merchant assessing the value of her competition. Her eyes lingered on Naruto, a flicker of intense curiosity in their violet depths. Felt was there, looking utterly miserable. She was squeezed into a formal yellow gown that was clearly not of her choosing, fidgeting and scowling under the watchful, serene eye of her knight. The sword Saint Reinhard van Astria. She looked like a caged wolf forced to attend a tea party, her rebellious energy a stark contrast to the room's formal rigidity. And then there was Crush Karsten. The Duchess of the Karsten house stood with perfect, military posture, her green hair tied back neatly. She was dressed in a formal male uniform, a declaration of her martial prowess and her rejection of traditional gender roles. Her expression was stern, her gaze sharp and analytical. She offered a curt, formal nod as Emilia and Naruto entered, her eyes sweepy ing over Naruto like a general assessing a new, unknown weapon system on the battlefield. There was no fear in her gaze, only intense, pragmatic evaluation. Naruto, dressed in a simple but well-made black tunic provided by Rosewall, felt the weight of their collective gazes. He ignored them, focusing instead on Emilia, who was nervously practicing the breathing he had taught her. He gave her a subtle, encouraging nod. A royal herald, his voice booming with practiced importance, finally opened the grand doors to the throne room. The candidates for the royal selection will now present themselves. The walk to the throne was a gauntlet. The room was a vast, oblong chamber lined with towering pillars. Between these pillars stood the collected nobility of Lugnica, a sea of silks, jewels, and powdered faces. As Emilia passed, a wave of hostile whispers followed her, a sibilant, venomous tide. The silver-haired witch, look at her, daring to show her face here, an affront to the dragon's bloodline, and who is that with her? Some foreign vagabond. Emilia flinched, her back stiffening, but she remembered Naruto's words. She straightened her spine, took a deep breath, and fixed her eyes on the empty throne at the far end of the room. Naruto walked at her side, his presence a silent, immovable mountain. He met every sneering gaze with a calm, blue-eyed stare that held neither malice nor fear. It was a look of such profound serenity that it was deeply unsettling, and many of the proud nobles found themselves looking away first, cowed by a power they could not comprehend. At the base of the dais stood the Council of Sages, a group of wizened, stern-faced old men who were the kingdom's political bedrock, and beside them, the grim-faced knight captain, Marcos Gildark. Marquis Bula, a portly and influential member of the council, stepped forward. His voice dripped with condescension. Lady Emilia, you have the gall to present yourself here, despite the obvious resemblance. Your very existence is a stain on our nation's history. Before Emilia could speak, he turned his scornful gaze on Naruto. And you, unidentified foreigner, by what right do you, a man of no name and no station, stand in these hallowed halls, at the side of a candidate for the throne of Lugnica? The question hung in the air, a formal challenge. From the assembly of knights, Julius Euclius, Anastasia's knight, stepped forward. His bearing was impeccable, his expression one of earnest, knightly principle. Marquis Bula speaks truly, he said, his voice ringing with conviction. The selection of our next ruler is a sacred process, governed by tradition and honor. Your presence here, sir, is an irregularity. We knights have sworn our lives to uphold the honor of the kingdom. We must ask that you state your name, your origin, and your intentions, lest you be removed. The entire room was focused on Naruto, a predator pack waiting for the first sign of weakness. Emilia looked at him, her newfound confidence wavering. Naruto remained silent for a long moment, letting the weight of their challenge settle. Then he spoke, his voice quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the vast hall without any effort. A phenomenon that silenced the whispers instantly. "My name is Naruto." He paused, then addressed the second question. His eyes seemed to look past the nobles, past the walls of the castle, into a distant, sorrowful memory. "As for my origin," he said, his voice taking on a resonant, somber timbre, "I am the last son of a world that is no more." A wave of shock rippled through the hall. The cryptic, tragic finality of his words stunned them. It was an answer so far beyond the scope of their political squabbles that it left them speechless. What did one say to a man who claimed to be the lone survivor of a dead world? He then addressed the final question, the question of his right to be there. His gaze moved from the council and settled on the magnificent, sun-shaped gold, an emblem of the kingdom of Lugnica that was mounted on the wall high above the empty throne. "You invoke the sun as your symbol of strength and prosperity," he said, his voice rising slightly, imbued with a strange power. "You pray to it for bountiful harvests and victory in battle. You carve its image into your most sacred places." He swept his gaze across the assembled nobles, and for the first time, his placid expression held a hint of something akin to pity. "You have forgotten what true light feels like." He raised his right hand, palm facing the ceiling. A single, pure mote of light, no bigger than a firefly, drifted from his palm. It floated to the exact center of the throne room, hovering in the air about 10 feet off the ground. Then, it began to expand. Silently, majestically, Chi grew into a perfect sphere of golden light, a miniature, captive sun about a meter in diameter. It radiated no heat, it made no sound, but it shone with a brilliance that was not merely physical. It was a light of pure, conceptual authority. It was the light of truth. And in that light, the shadows recoiled. Naruto, with his sight, saw it clearly. The dark, clinging shadows of deceit, corruption, and malice that clung to Marquis Bula and several of the other nobles visibly flickered and drew back, as if in agony. The men themselves felt a sudden, inexplicable wave of nausea and fear, a deep-seated instinct telling them that they were being judged by a power that could see the rot in their souls. Naruto lowered his hand, his eyes locking with the knight captain's. "I stand here by the right of the power that gives your kingdom life," he declared, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. "I support Emilia's claim not as her knight, but as her ally. Her heart is free of the shadows that plague this room. Her desire to see all people treated with dignity is a light far brighter than any you have known. That is why she is worthy of the throne." He let his gaze drift to Crush Karsten. Her eyes were wide, her disciplined composure momentarily broken. But what he saw in them was not fear. It was a dawning, electrifying comprehension. She was not just seeing a display of magic. She was a military strategist witnessing the debut of a weapon that could win a war without a single sword being drawn. She was a stateswoman seeing a power that could, perhaps, truly purge the corruption from the kingdom. She was a lioness, proud and powerful, who had just witnessed the silent, effortless flight of a dragon in a room full of squawking crows. Naruto dispelled the light with a thought, plunging the room back into its comparatively dim, candle-lit state. The throne room of the kingdom of Lugnica was left in a state of profound, stunned, and terrified silence. Chapter 4 End. The stunned silence that followed Naruto's display in the throne room was a weapon in itself. It shattered the nobles' arrogant composure, replacing it with a primal fear of the unknown. The royal selection, which was meant to be a predictable political contest, had been irrevocably upended by a force that defied their understanding of reality. In the ensuing chaos, the formal session was hastily concluded. The council members eager to retreat and discuss this terrifying new development in hushed, panicked tones. Naruto and Emilia departed from the castle, leaving a wake of whispers and wide-eyed stares. Emilia, for her part, had held true to his counsel. Bolstered by his staggering demonstration, she had met every gaze with a newfound, quiet confidence, her presence no longer an apology but a statement. She had not needed to say a word. Naruto had spoken for her in a language the entire kingdom would now be forced to learn. The days that followed were a strange lull in the storm. The other candidates retreated to their own domains to strategize. Priscilla Bariel sent a single, laconic message: "The sun's audacity is amusing." For now, Anastasia Hoshin made quiet inquiries through her mercantile networks, attempting to put a financial and historical value on a being who seemed to have neither. Felt, according to a weary-looking Reinhard who paid a brief, formal visit, was simply G. Lad the stuffy party was over and was back to exploring the capital's less reputable districts. It was from Crush Karsten that the most direct response came. A messenger arrived at the Rosewall estate 3 days after the summons. He was a soldier, not a courtier, his bearing immaculate and his gaze direct. He carried a single, crisp letter, sealed with the green wax of the Karsten Duchy. It was addressed not to Lady Emilia or Lord Mathers, but directly and solely to Naruto. Emilia watched as Naruto broke the seal, her expression a mixture of pride and nervousness. The Duchess Karsten is a formidable woman, she said. She is proud, honorable, and a brilliant military mind. She doesn't waste time on pleasantries. For her to contact you directly, it means you impressed her more than anyone. Rem, who was pouring tea, paused. Her movements almost imperceptible. A faint shadow of wariness crossed her features. She trusted Naruto implicitly, but her devotion made her instinctively suspicious of other powerful women who sought his attention. It was a nascent, possessive loyalty she was still learning to navigate. Naruto read the letter. Its contents were as direct and pragmatic as the woman Emilia had described. It was not a flowery invitation but a formal request for a private meeting at her estate at his earliest convenience. The subject was stated simply, a frank discussion concerning the future stability of the kingdom of Ludnica. An astute woman, Naruto murmured, folding the letter. She knows that stability is the true prize, not the throne itself. Are you going to go? Emilia asked. Yes, Naruto replied without hesitation. Alliances born from strength and mutual interest are the only kind that last. Rosewall's games are useful, but his motives are a labyrinth. The Duchess Karsten, I suspect, builds with straight lines. He looked at Emilia and offered a reassuring smile. Don't worry, a potential ally is better than a certain rival. The Karsten ducal estate was the physical embodiment of its mistress. Where Rosewall's manor was a Gothic sprawl of secrets and shadows, Crush's home was a fortress of elegant pragmatism. The main building was constructed of clean, white stone and dark timber, its lines severe and militaristic yet possessing an undeniable grace. The vast grounds were not filled with frivolous flowerbeds but with manicured lawns that doubled as tactical training grounds, obstacle courses, and archery ranges. The air smelled of cut grass, polished leather, and steel, and was filled with the crisp, rhythmic sounds of soldiers' ironing in the distance, a constant hum of readiness. Naruto was greeted at the gate not by a butler, but by a stern, uniformed captain of the guard. He was escorted with brisk efficiency through halls decorated not with portraits of ancestors, but with framed maps of the kingdom and famous battlefields. There was no artifice here, only purpose. He was led not to a parlor or a sitting room, but to Crush's private strategy room. It was a large, airy chamber dominated by a colossal table, its surface a single, massive, intricately detailed map of Ludnica. Books on history, economics, and military theory lined the walls. Crush Karsten stood waiting for him, dressed in her signature white and black uniform. Standing silently in the corner was a figure Naruto recognized from the castle, a strikingly handsome, silver-haired old man with the bearing of a master swordsman. This was Wilhelm van Astria. Crush dismissed her captain with a nod, and the doors closed, leaving the three of them alone. She gestured not to a chair, but to the map itself. Welcome to my home, Naruto, she said, her voice as crisp as the air outside. I trust your journey was untroubled. She didn't wait for an answer. I do not deal in parlor tricks or displays of light, no matter how impressive. I deal in strength, strategy, and results. Your demonstration in the throne room was a superb piece of psychological warfare. You destabilized my rivals and positioned Emilia as a credible threat, all without drawing a sword. For that, you have my professional respect. But political theater does not win a war. So, show me your substance. It was a direct challenge, a demand for proof. Naruto met her intense, green-eyed gaze with his own serene calm. He leaned over the map, his eyes tracing the borders, the supply lines, the key fortresses. You are preparing for war on 2 fronts, Naruto stated, tapping a region bordering the Volician Empire. A potential border skirmish here, where imperial ambition is a constant threat. He then tapped an area deep within Lugnika's own territory. And a war against an internal insurgency here, the witch cult. Your troop deployments are sound, defensive, designed to contain threats rather than eliminate them. It is the strategy of a ruler who seeks to preserve what she has. Crush's eyes widened slightly. He had, with a single glance at her map, deduced the core of her entire military doctrine. Wilhelm's stoic expression flickered with surprise. However, Naruto continued, his voice dropping slightly, your strategy is predicated on the assumption that your enemies will act rationally. The Volician Empire is driven by a philosophy of strength, which is predictable. The witch cult is driven by nihilistic madness. They will not attack your fortresses, they will attack your farms. They will not seek to capture your supply lines, they will seek to poison your wells and burn your fields. They do not want to conquer your kingdom, Duchess. They want to watch it die screaming. He straightened up, his gaze locking with hers. You prepare for a war of logistics against an enemy that worships chaos. You will lose more civilians than soldiers, and the fee. Are they so will rot your kingdom from within long before your armies are defeated on the field. That is your strategic blind spot. The room was silent. Crush stared at him, her mind racing. In 5 minutes, this man had dissected her life's work and exposed its fundamental flaw with a clarity that was both infuriating and terrifyingly brilliant. He didn't think like a general, he thought like a philosopher of war. He thought about the why behind the fighting, not just the how. You speak with the certainty of a man who has seen such things before, she said, her voice tight. I have seen worlds burn for lesser reasons. Naruto replied, a flicker of ancient sorrow in his eyes that was gone as quickly as it appeared. Crush took a deep breath, her respect for him deepening into something more. This was not a mere magician. This was a mind, a will, that operated on a level she had only ever read about. But the test was not over. A sharp mind must be supported by a capable body, she said. Her voice regaining its steady cadence. She unbuckled the dress sword at her hip. Accompany me to the training grounds. I would test your mettle. Wilhelm opened the doors that led out onto a private, sand-filled dueling circle. Crush took her stance, her blade a blur as she ran through a series of warm-up exercises. The air around her seemed to crackle with her fighting spirit. Naruto walked onto the sand opposite her. I will not use my authority, he said calmly. Only my own skill against yours. It would be a disservice to your mastery to do otherwise. Crush's lips curved into the barest hint of a smile. It was a sign of respect she had not expected, and she appreciated it more than any compliment. An honorable sentiment. Let us begin. She attacked. She was a whirlwind of steel, a true genius of the sword. Her style was the pinnacle of Lugnican swordsmanship, a perfect fusion of elegance and lethal efficiency. Every lunge was precise, every parry perfectly timed. She moved with the grace of a dancer and the killing intent of an assassin. Naruto, using only the hand-to-hand combat discipline of his former life, was her equal. He was a force of nature, a river flowing around her steel. He didn't block her strikes so much as he redirected them, his movements fluid, economical, and breathtakingly fast. Where she was a storm of focused, sharp strikes, he was the calm eye at its center. Untouchable and serene, their duel was a physical conversation. Her blade would ask a question, a sharp thrust to the heart, and his open palm would answer, deflecting the blow and creating a new opening. It was a clash of the highest form of formal training versus a lifetime of desperate, real-world battlefield experience. Wilhelm watched from the sidelines, his old, tired eyes wide with a professional awe he had not felt in decades. The boy's movements were alien, yet they possessed a flawless martial logic. The spar ended in a perfect stalemate. Crush, using a burst of speed, managed to place the tip of her sword a millimeter from his throat. In the exact same moment, Naruto's rigid, spear-like fingers came to a stop an inch from her heart. A single move from either of them would have meant death for both. They held the position for a long moment, panting, sweat beading on their brows. You are a monster, Crush breathed, a wide, genuine grin finally breaking through her stern facade. It was a grin of pure, exhilarating respect. As are you, Naruto replied, his own lips curving into a small smile. He relaxed his stance. As she sheathed her sword, he noticed it, a faint, silvery scar. No longer than an inch, on the back of her sword hand. It was an old wound, one a skilled healer would have erased completely. That it remained meant it was either a reminder she chose to keep, or it was left by a cursed blade. A past failure? He asked gently, his voice losing its battlefield edge. Crush's smile vanished, her expression turning guarded. She glanced at the scar. A duel I lost, long ago. My swordsmanship was found lacking. It is a reminder to never again overestimate my own abilities. A good leader does not erase their failures, Naruto said, his eyes soft with understanding. They learn from them, but they should not be shackled by them, either. He took a step closer. May I? He asked, his gaze asking for permission. Hesitantly, Crush extended her hand. She did not know what he intended, but she had seen his mind and felt his skill. She was willing to trust him. He lightly touched the scar. A soft, warm, golden light, no brighter than a candle flame, glowed from his fingertips for a single, silent moment. It was an act of immense power, wielded with the delicacy of a surgeon and the gentleness of a lover. When he pulled his hand away, the scar was gone. The skin was perfect, as if the wound had never been. Crush stared at her hand, utterly speechless. This was not the overwhelming, awe-inspiring power from the throne room. This was an act of intimate, personal restoration. He had seen her hidden flaw, the secret symbol of her shame, and had not judged it, but had gently and effortlessly erased it. It was a gesture of understanding more profound than any words. She looked up at him, her green eyes, which had held respect and admiration, now holding something deeper, something far more personal and powerful. "What are you?" she whispered, her voice filled with an awe that had nothing to do with magic or strength. "A reason to hope," he replied simply. Crush Karsten, the Iron Duchess, the proud lioness of Lugnica, felt her formidable walls crumble. She had found a peer, an equal, a being whose mind, body, and soul were all forged of a strength she could not only respect, but believe in. She extended her hand, not as a duelist, but as a partner. "An alliance, then," she said, her voice unwavering. "Between my house and yours." Naruto took her hand. His grip was warm and firm. "An alliance," he agreed. Their and Shake sealed a pact that would forever alter the course of the kingdom. Chapter 5 End. The end. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.